So you have your constitution, which is kind of like what you're born with, and then you have imbalances. And in the course, we're dealing with imbalances and saying, hey, this person is exhibiting these sort of personality traits. And the question is whether they're an imbalance or it's just who they are. It acknowledges both things, which is super helpful. A imbalance in the doshas is when, like even when you read pulses, which is not part of the foundation, of course, what you do is first read the constitution, the baseline of the person, and then you see how their current situation is different from that. So it works the same way when you're assessing someone, where you you see the person and let's say they're super type A, but the question is that an evidence of an imbalance, or is that just kind of like how they are, right? Like, and that's always the question: do I have a problem, or am I just seeing somebody's, am I just looking at somebody? Okay. So the question is that we all have to answer is we're not Ayurvedic doctors, right? We're not prescribing medicine. Like all we have to figure out, which makes our job a little easier in some ways, is do I think that having this person balance their pitta will have an effect on the condition that they're complaining about? But they have a lot of anxiety. And with anxiety, you're always asking this question: is the pitta driving the vata imbalance? Is the fire sort of moving everything around so much that this person can't find balance, or are they just vata imbalanced? And so more importantly with all this is, hey, am I going to have them do a vata balancing practice like movement and breath, or does something else need to happen? So I would flip this question back to you, which is part of the practices you're giving this person for vata balancing working as a practitioner, right? Like you've settled on your course of action, and I wouldn't change it. You don't change things that are working, right? Until you see them through.
Yeah.
So, and you know what the hardest thing is with everything, probably in life, I guess. But what the hardest thing is that it takes time, right?
Yeah.
Like you've done yoga, like you get better at it. So you might have to, it might be really boring. You might have to do moving and breathing and alternate nostril breath for 6 months, and you slowly see him getting better and better over that time, and the reason you would flip to pitta balancing is because you're not seeing your strategy working, or your client says, my body's full of inflammation and I know there's something else going on here, you know what I mean? But you really have to kind of pan back a little bit and say, okay, what has this person really done? They've done a little bit of yoga every day for 1 month, and that result, I don't even know the details of this, but I'm going to guess this, and let's see if I'm right, is probably better than the meds he's on. So you've already got him a better solution. It's amazing. It's totally amazing. That's what I'm pointing out. Like it's amazing, that result. Somebody who's having 2 to 3 days, it's the same. Let me put it in a different context for you. You get somebody with migraine headaches and they have them 4 days a week, and you give them a practice and they come back and they have them 2 days a week. But like, working with you just got them 100 days a year back. 2 yoga therapy sessions and 30, like I see this stuff all the time, and of course them and you are both like, no migraines is better. And it's not that you shouldn't go towards that, but your timing, your job as a yoga therapist is to like really emphasize when someone does something for themselves, which is all we're doing, that works. You have to like really be in there, and you can't be second guessing yourself. Like you have to be like, look, what you just did was spend 30 minutes a day moving and breathing, and this was your result. They see that they have agency over their own condition. Yeah, I mean, I do. It's not our superpower. So that's not like what we're for. Like we're not for emergent stuff. So I just want to remind us of that. We're more like skill building over time. However, there's 2 ways people ground through anxiety depending on what's going on from them in general. So one is introceptive experiences, and one is the opposite of that, basically taking in things through their senses. So usually, not always, but usually when someone's in a big anxiety event, interoceptive experience doesn't work so well. So that's why when you say just take some breaths and all that, like unless someone has a lot of skills with that, usually that's not. I mean, if you've ever been completely freaking out, just generally, right? It doesn't work. If someone starts being like, just breathe, you're like, I can't breathe, I'm freaking out. So, so another approach would be something sensory, and that could be touch, or that could be not your touch, but like them touching something, feeling their feet on the ground, hearing sounds in the room, looking at something and taking it in, any sensory input that gives the awareness really shows the awareness where it is in space and time. Because what's happening when you're having a panic attack, right? You're outside of that. Like now you're no longer taking in present centered things, right? You're in your own internal feedback loop. So, you know, um, even like a fidget toy, like you think about kids and stuff, or a squishy ball, something where it takes your mind, right? And it asks it to pay attention to something else. So those are I mean, that's just like some general suggestions for people. What happens with yoga therapy is that you get better over time at bringing yourself into the present. I mean, that's what happens with yoga, right? In general. So the more you skill build with your client, like this person's only been doing yoga a month, say, right? So they've already seen a reduction in their panic attack because he's already got that skill, like better than he did. Like he can get himself back into his environment and his, internal and external reality matching in a day instead of 2 to 3 days. And you could just imagine that shrinking over time. But again, the skill is our superpower, not like, I mean, the Xanax is because you can't do it, right? That's what Xanax for. You can't do it. And the Xanax is going to like shut some stuff down. And then hopefully over time you get better, right? You don't need the Xanax because you can feel your feet on the ground. And I will add just this one thing that you have to remember when you're working with mental health, people's brains are different. And so, the way, I mean, there's neuroscience around this, but, just a sort of colloquial way, there's, the way people's brains respond, their uptake of glutamine, all sorts of things in their minds as we discover more about the brain. People are really different. So some people will have a harder time doing this, and it will require a larger dose of yoga therapy. That's how you want to look at it. It's going to take more work for certain people, right, to get there. So you can't compare your own. I'm sharing this just to remind us we can't compare our own experience because we have a different brain and history and all that, but even our biology is different than the person in front of us, right? So, and it's easy to forget a little bit if you've been doing yoga for 20, 30 years, if you're far into your practice, right? It's very hard to remember what it's like. I can remember in a storytelling way, but I cannot remember the person I was when I was 25. And my inability to feel my feet on the ground for days at a time. Because I've lived through years of anxiety disorder, but like I cannot remember it now in like a real felt sense, But pacing is a big topic, I think. It's a really good question. I just want to say, like, that's the whole thing. It's like, do I change or do I do that? I mean, this is what we're always thinking about. And it feels really weird to have someone come back to you and be like, keep doing that same thing. Right? Like you feel like a little bit like you're not like giving them their money's worth, like they're like, they came to see you and you're like, yeah, keep doing that thing. I do it all the time. And after you do it a lot, you realize that people really appreciate it actually. Like I'm doing the right thing. Like I should keep doing this. I'm I'm winning. You're like, yes, you're winning. Let's keep you winning and we'll change it when we need to. So your sort of expertise in determining that is why they're coming. It's not so much that it's not a yoga class, right? You don't have to like wow them with this new cool technique. But it is our job to remind them and show them how amazing it is. If you get a result like that, because I don't know what he's like. Maybe you could tell us, Sophie, but like I have clients often that are like, it's not really working. I was getting like 4 migraines a week and I got 2 this month. I don't know, yoga therapy, it's not working. I'm like, really? Because that seems like you got 14 less migraines than you did last month. I'm pretty sure that's what you just told me. They're like, yeah, I was kind of hoping for 0. It was like, so you have to help them tell the story that's accurate. So here's like my general thoughts on neuroma for what it's worth. Like you have like 2 levels at which you could work. So the first level is where you should always start. And that level is like the physical level, just like straight up muscles and gait. So, the issue with anything that involves pain and sort of disability, in that way, is that you actually don't know. You could guess, but sometimes we're wrong. You don't know how much is being contributed by, say, the weakening of the muscles, like the atrophy that's happening, the gait shifting, the non-movement in general. So not about me at all. I'm just going to give this example just for us to wrap our minds around. My body feels awesome all the time, unless I'm 51, I'm in good shape, I have nothing wrong with me. If I don't exercise for 3 days, I'm a mess. Like I have back pain, I have shoulder pain. Like it's kind of crazy, how bad I feel. And it's like it's an interesting thing though, right? Because there's nothing wrong with me. But that's how fast, you know, things can change. So just imagine, just for everybody, imagine that you've not been able to walk, you're not moving your feet in like the ways you would normally move them, you're not moving the toes in the way you move. So in addition to the neuroma pain, which is probably most of it, but then you have all this other stuff that could happen. So that's where I'd start. I would do all the motions of her feet and toes. I would re-strengthen her feet. I would then work your way up her body. Once she can, if she can stand, or once she's like sort of walking, or you can see her walk, I think about her gait and the musculature that it's online, so it's a little tricky, but you can have her move around a little bit. And I would kind of do it like a physical condition and see what could happen there. And then the second part is, can any of the other koshas affect your healing outcomes? Like that's the question. So, you have pranic body stuff. You could try a prana nidras for a while, see if that changes either her pain or her outcome. We know that meditating regularly changes people's pain response. As I have a lot of faith in brainwave state change and the healing powers of yoga nidra. So I would be totally confident, at least offering that and saying, here's why you might try this. Because your neuroma's healed, right? They can go either way. So, yes. What are you going to do? So we know, just to remind everyone, if you haven't heard this, that when you do yoga nidra, and you do it really consistently, you change brainwave states. True of meditation too, and you get more healing brainwave states in your daytime hours. So those would be the levels I would be working on. And I would tell her everything. I'd be like, these are the possibilities. Are you willing to put some time in? And like you said, I'd start in a chair, moving her feet, get her to do feet exercises every day, then kind of work on her hips and legs and core muscles and make sure that her gait is reasonable. People start striking, as you know, because you are walking and you're striking in really not perfect or useful ways on your feet. Imagine, trying to avoid your neuromas and your pain. So then you're causing problems, right, by not using your feet correctly.
Yep.
So that often requires flexing and extending and spreading toes, and even the PT kind of stuff, like picking up a towel with your foot, all those things to like keep your muscles like working because you're not using them the way you're supposed to anymore.
Right.
Prevention and disease are different. And that's the thing to remember when you're looking at research. They're not the same. So it could be true, for instance, that like a pescatarian diet with olive oil might be a perfectly reasonable heart disease prevention diet, for instance. I'm not saying I believe this, even though that is pretty much how I eat. Um, but you know, versus someone who has like I know a lot of Ornish's work is, for instance, has been with people with late stage heart disease. And he's been really interested in like zero fats, basically. Like, what do we do if we pull all the fat out of someone's diet? And it does reverse heart disease. But that doesn't always mean that fat is a precursor to heart disease, just in case you haven't thought about this ever, because that would be a really easy conclusion to draw. And actually, Ornish kind of does it in his books, which is the only thing that annoys me about him. He sort of like puts out there that everyone should eat in a certain way based on his research with sick people. And sick people and healthy people are different. .org, that doctor, because I just like his videos. I think they're really easy to digest. So if you haven't gone to that website, I would highly recommend it. Highly. Nutritionfacts.org. Click any condition and you'll get like a literally a 2-minute video of, and they're really entertaining about whatever the dietary implications are for the thing you're looking at. But what you realize from watching those, there is evidence, say, there's pretty solid evidence that a lot of animal protein is like super bad for humans, you know, in terms of disease outcomes and stuff like that. And, you know, if you're looking at stroke or cancer or heart disease, that clearly you would not want to be on standard American diet. And in some of his videos, which I'd encourage everyone to watch, I mean, he has a pretty good argument for like how like the Mediterranean diet is not really the best either, even though that's what's pushed. So it's a nice thing to take in because he does a really good job explaining why the recommendations that we hear are given to the public versus what the actual studies said. So in like blood pressure studies, right? I quote this a lot just because I think it's important. In blood pressure studies, like the people who did the studies that recommended the Mediterranean diet knew that that was not the best diet. And they made a public health choice, basically based on what will people do, not what is the best thing. And as a yoga therapist, you really want to be thinking is what's the best thing for this individual. And they're very different perspectives when you're talking to somebody and sharing information about diet. So the one thing I hate, actually, you just said it, and this is not a criticism of you. This is like a personal pet peeve of mine. I don't believe people should eat what feels good. I don't think that is a good determiner of what is going to keep you healthy for any given disease. You can eat what feels good, and it's good in a blood sugar way, but you can't feel whether a diet's going to give you cancer or not, right? You can't feel that. So there's a kind of yoga teacher thing and just basically alternative health practitioner thing since the day I started that I've been hearing, which is just eat what, you know, like listen to yourself. But it's a kind of a combination, right, of listening to yourself and what you will actually do and what we know from science. There's like 3 sort of parts of it. And I will conclude my pedestal moment with this. Everyone who studies this stuff knows that there are genetic differences between people. So there's some really interesting stuff that Nancy's bringing up in the heart disease realm that's actually outside that. It's like so obvious that large amounts of saturated fat are bad for your arteries. Like if you really look at the research, it doesn't matter what your genetics are that much. And that's what's interesting when they really parse out the studies. So there are certain things that matter for everyone because when you compare diets, let's say with some animals in them versus without animals, and how many heart attacks people have, et cetera, what you start to see, if you don't want to go down this rabbit hole, here's the summary, is that none of the people that are long lived and are not having as many strokes and heart attacks are eating high saturated fat diets, except like some wacky weird stuff that doesn't really matter, like Inuits and people that only live on whale blubber, but they're probably not that relevant to like most of us, So and you start to see like that there is actually science, and I think it's interesting. I think as a yoga therapist, just to kind of bring it back, it's all in context of your whole diet. So what Nancy was bringing up is heart disease, and we know that the oils are not good if you already have heart disease. But I mean, when you're looking at nutrition, but it's like anything else, you have to have a broad perspective. Like we also know that people that like use like high quality olive oil in their cooking have higher testosterone levels, which could be good or bad depending on what you're trying to do. So it's like if you have heart disease, you don't care about that, but like, I mean, there's just a million examples like that, and some of the longest lived people in the world use olive oil. So clearly it's not like a killer, like in a magnifying glass like that. It's just our diet. When I say our, I mean like the Western diet, like nobody thinks fried food's good for you, right? Like we all know that. Like nobody eats French fries and goes like, this is a health food. Like this food is the key, to a long, healthy life. Like we all know. And then we make our choices. And again, probably just so we don't get like spun out, eating French fries and never eating meat is different than eating French fries and pairing that with a charred burger, right? Cooked in oil. Like, I mean, there's a lot of different things going on there. And you have to look at all of it in the context of what's being pushed out, which is what makes it really hard to study. So like if you put anybody on like a raw diet, lots of people's health will improve. Is it because it's raw? I don't think so, based on what I've read, but I think it's because they're eating a ton of vegetables, right? And we know that tons, like Dr. Wall's work, which we look at in the advanced program for MS. Dr. Wall's a doctor who's been studying MS. She had MS and basically reversed her MS, is doing all these clinical studies. Her diet is just tons of vegetables and specific qualities and meat. It's paleo. And that seems to work for that condition. But again, it's like organic meats and like, I can't remember, 5 cups of mushrooms and onions a day and like a pile of greens this big. And so it's hard to know what's doing what, and again, no oils really. So you have to contextualize it. So I wouldn't just look at oil and be like, oil bad. I don't think that's as productive as you would want for yourself even. Unless you're like looking, my whole family has died from cardiovascular diseases, at a young age. Like this is the kind of thing we look at. This is, and the chance of me having heart disease before I'm 50 is like kind of like 95% based on what I've seen in my family. Then I would be deep in that research, as a preventative. Or if your family has like a really high cancer incidence, I probably wouldn't eat hardly any animal protein. That's the way I would, because we know, and I definitely wouldn't drink because we know those things are up your cancer risk.